It's time now for the political analysis of Fromm and Fuller. Al Fromm, former political advisor to President Bill Clinton, and Craig Fuller, former political advisor to both Presidents Ronald Reagan and George H.W. Bush. Good morning, all. Al, I don't think there's any doubt now that Joe Biden's age will be the critical issue in this upcoming election, especially after the special counsel report last week.
Well, first of all, I think Joe Biden's age will be an issue. It's not going to be necessarily the critical issue in this election. I mean, look, Joe Biden's old. He's the oldest guy ever to run for president. In the last, I guess it was an NBC poll, 86% of voters expressed concern about his age. And there's no question, as the special counsel pointed out, that he makes gaffes. Biden actually always has made gaffes, but as somebody who's known him for a long time, it's undeniable that he's slowed down a little bit and he's lost a step. And that will be a problem for him in this election, a big problem. In a sense, the best thing he has going for him on that front is Donald Trump, who it seems to me to be showing his age even more. He continues to make the same kind of mistakes we all know about, mistaking Nancy Pelosi for Nikki Haley. He says he's running against Obama. He tends to say that almost at every rally. He thinks he's worried somebody's going to start World War II. So he's got his own problems. And moreover is Nikki Haley, who is, I think, running a really good campaign with no market for her product, has made it clear he's acting more and more unhinged every day. But the most scary thing, and the thing that bothers me the most, is that Trump seems confused about whether he's on America's side or not. He can't decide whether he likes Russia or America more. And Biden is old, but he doesn't cast those doubts. The other thing about Trump that I think is going to cause some problems is that he continues to put his own interests above the country's. We all know about him torpedoing the compromise on immigration, and that does not help Republicans. It cost them a seat in New York this week. I happened to be up there the last couple of weeks, and I came back right before the House scuttled the compromise and the Senate scuttled it, and I came back convinced Republicans were going to win on the immigration issue. Clearly, that turned it around. So, Biden's age is a problem. Trump has his problems too. I think Biden needs to own up to his age. Getting angry about it sort of reinforces that you're old and crotchety. He needs to do what Craig and his old boss Ronald Reagan did, was to joke about things, be a little light about it, emphasize his experience. And he also needs to recognize that voters are very concerned about it. And, that puts a particular spotlight on his vice presidential running mate. Because as Nikki Haley does when she doesn't eviscerate Trump, she talks about, I'm really running against Kamala Harris. Well, whether Biden runs or not is going to be his decision. I do not see, barring an unforeseen incident, I do not see the party, revolting and trying to nominate somebody else. But I do think there may be more and more pressure on him to replace Kamala Harris on the ticket as we get closer to the convention.
Greg, do you agree with Al and just try to humor the American public about your age?
First, I have to say that last part's like breaking news. A change in a running mate is one of the most difficult things any president, I think, has to confront, even when there's a preponderance of evidence that it might help. But that's been on my side, so who knows what'll happen. I do agree with Al. I have thought, as you know, that Biden probably at some point would say there's lots of things I can do with my life, with my family, and I'll govern until the end of 2024. But he does not seem inclined to do that. And I got to thinking about, I don't know about you guys. I don't wake up every day thinking about how old I am. I go about my activities. I think Biden is almost unaware of the age factor in some ways. And like Al said, if he was more aware, thoughtful about it, I don't think he'd be getting angry. It tends to demonstrate a grumpiness and an age issue, not put people at ease. And I totally agree with Al, about if the contest is between Trump and Biden, he's not going to be running against a 45-year-old man or woman who's articulate and doesn't lose track of who's who and and who he's running against, like Trump has done. So the comparison in a general election, if as we hope, we're down to two candidates, I don't know how critical the age issue will prove to be, barring, as Al said, a really unfortunate event of some kind that makes it difficult for Biden to run. I did hear last night, it was worth looking up and listening to if people are interested, a really good interview on the NewsHour with two people who, one does research and one's a doctor, having to do with memory loss and memory and cognitive issues. And I have been through, not on myself, but with my late wife, cognitive testing. And the important thing the point they were making, and the important thing about cognitive testing, is they're looking for where a person stands relative to their age group across several different factors, 7, 8 key factors. And it's very likely, actually, that an individual will be right in sync with their age group on some of those factors, ahead of their age group on others, and behind on some others. But the important thing is not just a one-time test. I think Nikki Haley's wrong about that. You don't just do a one-time test. You have to see what the trend is. And because there's some critical thinking elements tested, and if those are deteriorating more rapidly, then simply the recall factor, which is thinking of Gaza and I said Mexico, it's not like he doesn't understand the difference or something. But if it truly did not understand the difference, then that's a cognitive concern, of much greater proportion. And in some ways, I think the media in Washington, as they always do, reduce very complicated, complex things like cognitive impairment, cognitive testing, that sort of thing, to well, he's losing his memory. Well, not really. He may be not recalling words as fast, or he may not. All of us misspeak at one point or another. He may not be recognizing he misspoke and correct it right away. But that's become a news story, and it tends to challenge, I think, unfairly, a whole range of cognitive activity. But the problem is we don't really know exactly where it falls, or how. Is it just? It is the natural aging process to some extent. I would maintain that he probably is well ahead of his peer group in several very important cognitive areas. And I think also I would agree with Al, whether it will be an issue because there surely will be additional misstatements. But the real issues that people will go to vote on have more to do with the experience and the leadership of one individual versus the other. And I think I know where I fall in that equation, but it's gonna, that's where the race, I think, will turn, and people ultimately will say, look, in fact, a lot of the Trump voters are so disenfranchised from government. I mean, I don't know how much they care, but their question will always be, which of these two is going to be better for me? Which is going to bring a more stable democracy, going to deal with international issues based on experience, not just bluster. Those are the kinds of things that I think the the Biden people should focus on.
Al, I want to pivot and talk a little bit about two things. First of all, Larry Hogan's entering into the United States Senate campaign in Maryland, and also the Santos seat going to a Democrat in a special election. I wondered if you could comment on both.
Larry Hogan is going to be the strongest Republican candidate, but it's still going to be an uphill climb for him to win. He has to survive a primary. I think there are 8 other candidates in it. And the danger is that for him, that Trump will jump in and back a candidate, probably can't defeat him. But remember that when Trump backed a candidate, that candidate, Dan Cox, easily defeated Trump's or Hogan's selected successor in who he had endorsed. So Trump has the ability to cause him some problems in the primary. But on top of that, Hogan he obviously had high approval ratings when he left the governorship among both parties. But he's won statewide elections twice, once a competitive one, and once the Democrats really didn't put up a particularly strong candidate. But he's never run in a presidential year, and that's a different year. It's a different turnout. He's not going to be on top of the ticket. The presidential candidate is going to be on top of the ticket. And Biden won Maryland by 33 points. That's a lot of votes to make up when you're down ballot. On top of that, the Democrats are likely to run a pretty strong mainstream candidate, either David Trone, who has so dominated the airways in the last few months that he's running now as the leading candidate. But the candidate that I thought and would probably finally emerge was Angela Alsobrooks, who's the county executive of Prince George's County, the largest county in the state, who's also a mainstream Democrat. And I think, to be honest with you, either one of them will be very difficult for Hogan to beat. Now, the Cook report has downgraded the seat from solid Democratic to leaning Democratic. But my guess is Hogan will run a competitive race, but in the end, that hill will just be a little bit too high for him to climb. Mm-hmm. The New York race, Tom Suozzi, was an old hand. He had represented that district for 6 years before he stepped down to run for governor. He's a moderate, maybe moderate to conservative Democrat, made it very, very clear. He did not mince any words about separating himself from Joe Biden. He ran his own campaign, and it was clear. If you listen to his acceptance speech, I think you got a lot of hints about the way he ran and probably the reason he won in a district that is important because it's probably reflective of a lot of the swing districts that are going to decide the presidential race. His opponent was a Ethiopian Orthodox Jew who had, I guess, immigrated to Israel, was in the IDF, and then came over here, obviously, in the state legislature. So Israel was also an issue in that campaign. But I think the big issue was immigration, and I think the most instructive thing, as I mentioned earlier, is that Suozzi was able to turn that issue, at least neutralize it, if not turn it to his advantage. Mm-hmm. So are there lessons? Yes. But the truth, in Suozzi also, interesting enough, CNN had AOC on as sort of the expert from New York, and Suozzi in his speech said he was not part of the squad. But again, in a general election, in a presidential year, candidates aren't going to be able to define themselves quite so clearly. They can't run quite so far from their presidential nominees. So I think it's important for Democrats because there are some lessons about how Suozzi ran. But in the long haul, it probably doesn't tell you a lot about what's going to happen in the fall.
Greg, you have the last two words.
Well, first with regards to Hogan, I am not sure that he's nearly as strong now as he was. It just intuitively, he seems to me like a public figure who there was a moment in time and it's moved on somewhat. So I don't know that he starts with as strong a base of support as some might think. Now, he's a very smart and seasoned public official, former public official and politician, so they must have polling that shows a path, certainly a path to getting the nomination. But I'll tell you, the only thing Al didn't mention but I think that I think is important. I think the stakes on this one might be highest for Governor Wes Moore, because Governor Moore has become a national figure, certainly among the Democratic Party. He raises money all over the country. If he can't help keep the Democrats in the majority in the Senate by electing a Democrat in his own state, if he can't raise the money necessary to defeat Hogan, even though he might not be at odds a lot with Hogan, I think the stakes for him, for Governor Moore, are pretty high to prove to Democrats that he can effectively help ensure an election for a Democratic candidate for the Senate. And I think he probably wants a Democratic majority, and he wants a Democrat from Maryland to help him with issues state related. So, and Wes Moore is clearly very popular. So now you're putting him into this context. I just think that a solid Democratic candidate, and as Al says, they have them there, is going to find a lot of support from the governor and a lot of support from Wes Moore friends and supporters to ensure their election. And had this race been earlier, after he left office, it might be different. I just think some of that bloom is off the so-called rose. The Santos race, I agree with Al. I'm not sure how much it tells us, but it does. It is instructive with regards to how some voters in that demographic look at issues that will definitely come up in the general election race, and it ought to give Republicans concern because I don't think they get as much mileage out of abortion issues and maybe even immigration issues as they think they will. And we're hearing a lot about these issues in states where Republicans are running in primaries, but after the middle of March, most of the primaries are over, and all of these candidates turn to that are now nominated or win in a primary. Now they turn to a general election, and those general election issues, as we've said here, are much more having to do with, what are you going to do to help me in my life? What are you going to do about the cost of gasoline and the cost of living and job security and healthcare and things like that? I think I said last week, 2/3 of the American people support the concept of immigration into this country. Is it really an issue? It certainly is in some states, but is it really a national issue? The way it's being treated now, it's definitely being played out because Trump wants to use it as an issue. But I don't know that it has the salience, and the Santos race would say maybe it doesn't among us, some of those demographic groups. So I think the nature of the campaigning will change inevitably after we get through this primary season, and it will turn much more to general election issues. And in that way, the flipping of that seat, I do think sends a message to both Democrats and Republicans, and we'll probably see campaign strategies adjusted for the general election as a result of it.
Well, we have to leave it there. Al Fromm, Craig Fuller, thank you so much indeed. We will see you next week.